Hello, my name is Andrew Grant, and in this video we'll be looking at templates, namespaces, identifiers and other bits and bobs related to C++ modules. This video is part of a small series of videos about C++ modules. Links to the other videos in the series and to the GitHub repositories are in the description. Throughout this series I've utilised Microsoft Visual Studio 2022. Simply because it has excellent support for C++ modules. If you're using one of the other major compilers, most of the code will work, but you may have problems with things like importing the standard library stud, among other things. There's a video which uses CMake and the Clang compiler, which shows you how to get around these issues. Link is in the description. Let's start with templates. This is, without a doubt, the one thing that modules have got exactly right. The creation and use of templates with modules is amazingly easy and efficient, and the error messages can get a tad weird, but on the whole they're not too bad. In fact, many of them are actually understandable. What you're looking at here is a class template. It's very basic and not at all production ready template utilizing C++ concepts. One of the advantages of modules with Visual C++ is the inclusion of all the standard libraries under the general heading of stud, which is why we don't have to import the concepts optional and string libraries. They're already imported. Hover over the stud word, and if you press F12 you can have a look at the stud header module. It's absolutely fascinating, really quite innovative, definitely well worth a look-see. But as you can see, a template is basically just as you would expect a template to look like. And this is the public facing module, which as you can see uses a macro. When using templates, it's probably best to put them in a separate library and configure that library as a static library. Don't forget to set the language standard to 20 or higher, though really better yet, the latest. And set scan sources for module dependencies to yes. Add the template library to the top level solution as you would normally, and then add a reference in the usual manner to the template library from the project from which you will utilize the template. To use the template, you just import the module as if it's a normal header file. One thing you do have to watch for is that the library you are importing is compiled for both debug and release. Using the imported library release version with the importing debug version does not create some problems. I expect this will change over the near future, but it's something you need to be quite aware of. See, the compilation process will treat the imported module quite literally as part of the main project. Take the time and have a quick peer at the assembly code. You'll discover a marvelous world of efficient and timely code, which is also easy to read and understandable. Quite an accomplishment there, and a saviour when you need a cuppa and time to find that bit you just know you can make more efficient and energy efficient. If there are any errors in the library, once you've located and corrected them, the best course of action is to literally clean the solution and recompile both the debug and release versions. I know that can be quite a process, but the importing project will generally default to what it has in the cache, unless the imported project is nice and clean. Then it will fetch the newly cleansed version and use that. Saves an awful lot of time and effort. Let's now have a quick peer at namespaces. I'm of the opinion that namespaces and modules go together like birds flock together. You can have a module with a namespace, or you can have multiple independent modules sharing the same namespace. You can even have namespaces of the same name, but which are completely independent of each other, simply because they're not exported within multiple modules. Though I would say this idea is a bit much. You're probably better off utilizing a separate module for the code and exporting that if you're doing this. Otherwise it could get very complicated. Just import the module and away you go. As you can see on this slide, the namespace const variables is exported from a separate module and imported into the relevant modules as required. And namespaces become very important when utilizing independent separate libraries. I suppose the key takeaway is, as usual, think carefully about the namespaces you use, but do use them. Now let's have a quick look at module identifiers. Here we can see the module identifier utilities. So what we're looking at here is the primary module for this group. And below this is a submodule. You can tell it's a submodule simply because it has a colon in front of its identifier. And as you can see from the inserted image, the module identifier has the primary module identifier, utilities, before it, with the submodule identifier, messages, following on after the colon separator. Next we have a module which is actually a primary module and not technically part of the utilities group of modules. This is despite it having utilities in the name and being located in the utilities folder. The dot, period, full stop, whatever you'd care to call it, in the middle of the identifier is there for your benefit. The linker and compiler ignore it completely. To them it's just part of their module identifier. The module could have been called random numbers and the compilation and linking would have been the same. Because this is a primary module, you just code it up as you would any other primary module. Just as a note, I found it best not to put the random number generator into any sort of a namespace. As you can see in this screenshot, the random number generator is sort of floating around and thankfully not looking for trouble. Pop them in a namespace and they seem to wander off and start creating mayhem. So probably best to leave them floating in the air like a dandelion seed. Now to use modules, you just call the primary module using its fully qualified identifier and away you go. And because the utilities.random number module is exported from the utilities module, you don't have to call it directly. You could and it wouldn't affect anything. Let's move on to commenting your code. This is quite frankly a bit of a hit and miss affair. There are times when it works well and there are other times when it doesn't. First things first, ensure that the comments are enabled in the Visual Studio Options dialog. For our purposes here we're going to use XML documentation. So set the generated documentation comments style to XML.comments. Then in project properties, making sure it's set to all configurations, set the document library dependencies to yes. And then set the generate XML documentation file to yes as well. Then you can write your comments as required. If you need to read or verify the comment, you can always look in the relevant XML file, which you will usually find in the debug folder. Let's now have a look at some of the more common errors you'll encounter with modules. The first remarkably common error you'll come across is cyclical dependencies, and they can be quite a pain in the neck. Because modules are self-contained, the possibility for cyclical dependencies is not that uncommon. Thankfully, the error message is actually quite clear and appears very quickly. You will absolutely face this error message. It's so common I've actually given up groaning about it when it appears. The fix is usually to clean the solution and then clean the project. In that order. Yep, I know that appears daft, but it does occasionally work. The next option is to compile the module independently of the project. Right click on the module and compile. Should work, but if that fails, close Visual Studio, open Windows Explorer, navigate to the project and then delete the x64 folder in both the project and project parent folder and in the code folder. Fire up Visual Studio again and all should be well. Right, I think that's about it for just now. We've actually covered a lot of ground here in a very basic and remarkably cursory way. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next video.